Hello and welcome to Everything I Knit in 2024. Hi, if we've not met before, I'm Eleanor. I'm known as Cosy Books and Knits online. I talk about knitting, books, lifestyle and general coziness. So if you'd like to join me in talking about everything I knit in 2024, then please grab a cup of tea, a cup of coffee and get cozy with me. Today I'm drinking a Yorkshire tea multi-biscuit brew, which is lovely. It just tastes like tea and biscuits. I'm a little late to the party in talking about everything that I knit in 2024 because to be honest I wasn't sure I should even make this video because I just felt when I looked at my pile it wasn't as big as a lot of other people. And I have a lot of unfinished projects that I'm not going to talk about here. We'll talk about that in a bit. And it just didn't feel like I could sort of stand up to everyone else's enormous piles of garments with all the sort of trendy pieces. But then I decided, do you know what? It's still worth showing what I have achieved this year because it is an achievement. I've got 10 pieces, I've got 6 garments, and I've got 5 accessories. And when I say that, that does sound like a lot. That is a big achievement. So I decided to share it anyway and to not diminish that. 2024 was actually my first full year of knitting. I started knitting in about November 23. So where we're starting here, I'd only been knitting a couple of months. I learned when I was younger and I'd sort of made a couple of scarves, that sort of thing. So I knew how to knit. Just very basic knits and purls. I didn't know anything about increases, decreases, shaping, knitting in the round, any of those sorts of things. So to me 2024 was a year of discovery. There are some knits in this pile that a lot of people I've spoken to who have been knitting for years and years haven't attempted because they seem too daunting, and I really launched myself headfirst into learning all I could. And that really is something to be proud of. So I'm really excited to share these things with you. I think what came with my year of discovery was the fact that there were so many patterns I heard of that I wanted to try immediately, or techniques that I was excited about, yarns I was excited about, that I started a lot more than I could finish. And I would get easily distracted and put patterns down, put projects down without finishing them. So I do have at least 10 unfinished projects from 2024. So I think I'm going to do a separate frog or finish video talking about all of my unfinished projects, the reason I put them down and whether I'm going to finish them or not. So I think that will be my next video. So today we'll do things I finished, and then next week probably we'll do things I didn't finish. So I'm going to talk about each project, talk about, because as I say, this year was such a learning curve that each one of these projects I learned something from. So I'm going to talk about each project and talk about what I learned from it, if I have positives, negatives, a general sort of rating. So let's get started. So these aren't in any specific order. I tried to go chronologically, but I didn't keep very good track throughout the year because I didn't really decide that I wanted to do that until quite late in the year. So they're in a general chronological order, but there might be 1 or 2 things that are sort of out of place. So the first thing I have to talk about, I'm going to show these, talk them through, and then I'll probably put footage or pictures here to show you a little bit more movement or detail. So I think that's the way we're going to do it because I can't be bothered to change in and out throughout the video. So we'll do a nice little spot of b-roll in editing, which I'm sure will save me time now and I will hate later. But the first thing I knit in January, I cast this on just after Christmas because I got my first set of interchangeable knitting needles for Christmas last year, or year before now, Christmas 2023, and a voucher for some proper wool. And I made my first full garment. So this was my very first full garment. Until that point I'd only been knitting socks and accessories, and it was the sweater number 18 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. I knit this in Drops Nepal in a general beige colour. So this, yes, it's a beautiful drop shoulder, sort of, I think they say it's a slightly retro 80s type shape design, and I do get that. It's quite oversized, but this has a lovely drape. So the drops Nepal is a wool and alpaca blend, and you can see it's pilled a little, though, you know, a D-pill would sort this right out and it would be no problems at all. So I don't really have an issue with the pilling because it's got quite a fluffy halo, so you'd expect that, and I can D-pill it. And for the cost, pilling is not really an issue to deal with for me. But I love this wool. It is so soft and cozy. When I first knitted this, I regretted the colour choice because I ordered it online, and when it came, it wasn't really the colour I thought it would be. It was a little bit more sort of beige, and I thought it would be a little creamier, a little more oatmeal. But as I've had this, I've really enjoyed the colour because it just goes with everything. So this has definitely ended up being my most worn garment throughout the year. And I don't have anything negative to say about the pattern. It was really easy as a beginner to follow, because you have, so it's a drop shoulder and the back yoke is worked with increases, so there's no short rows. The pattern is complex enough that it was really interesting and fun, but it's all knits and purls. It's really, really simple. There's not, once you get past the back yoke, there's not a great deal of shaping, just a little bit of decreases in the sleeves. And I didn't find this difficult at all to pick up and work as a beginner, so I really, really enjoyed it. And when I knit this, I bashed it out in a week and a half because I was just so excited, and I was so proud of it. And it was one of those things you put on your body and you go, I did that. So this was the project that made me really, really fall in love with garment knitting, because before that I was very intimidated by it. And the reason I started with socks, which is such a backwards thought because they're so much more complicated than a jumper, I started with them because I thought something small would be less intimidating because it would be quick. But actually, this is, I think, a worsted weight, quite chunky jumper with minimal shaping is not as difficult as a sock. So my thinking when I started knitting, it was just so backwards. But as I say, been a whole learning process, and I've packed a lot into one very short year. So the next thing on the list is my first sock knit of 2024. Going into 2024, I'd knit stockinette socks, I knit a cabled pair of socks and a pair of colourwork socks. 2 pairs of colourwork socks, I think, but I hadn't really got my tension right. So then the next pair of socks I knit were the Thunderhead socks by Northwood Knits. And they are these beautiful lacework socks. I've worn these a fair bit, so I'm going to put some pictures in of when they were freshly blocked. But you can see, if I try and open one up, they have this beautiful sort of mock cable lace panel running all the way down from cuff to toe. They're really beautiful, and this was in a hand-dyed yarn from Emma's Yarn. This was the first, I believe this was the first sock I knit with a hand-dyed. I decided when I finished that jumper as the achievement that I'd hit, I would treat myself to some bougie yarn to celebrate, and I did. And this was the first pair of socks I knit with that. And this was a really, really fun knit. It's a really lovely pattern. I always recommend Carly's patterns because she does these sock sets that are sort of thematic, if you like a style, but with 3 very different designs, and they're really beautifully written. But through this, I discovered I don't really enjoy lace knitting. That I love cables, so why you'd not do cables and do lace instead to try and mimic cables, I don't know, because I'd rather just do cables. But I committed and I got both socks done in a complicated lace pattern that my needles were really too blunt to handle. And again, I learned so much from doing this. I learned so much about lace, about sort of reading patterns and predicting patterns to try and knit a complex repeat without the pattern right in front of me. So they were a slight trial by fire, but one I really enjoyed. And I think I think I also did those as a test knit, which was my very, very first test knit. So another first. After those, I moved on to something that I'm calling it a finished pattern, a finished project, because I did finish the knit. I just haven't finished all the decor I decided to do, which will become clear. This is the Cloud Sweater by Petite Knit, and as you can see, I've been duplicate stitching stars onto this jumper. I haven't quite finished, but the knitting itself is finished, so it's a finished project. So as you can see, I have not finished all the duplicate stitch, that decoration that I'm doing on this jumper, but I will finish it. I think this was a huge learning process for me. So I used the Cloud Sweater pattern, but the Cloud Sweater is supposed to be knit in something like Drops Air, something very sort of lofty and fluffy, hence why it's called the Cloud Sweater. And I realise now why Drops Alaska, a very heavy rustic wool, is not the recommended yarn for that, because this is so weighty. It is so weighty. And I think because it's not been blocked, because I was going to block it after I finished the stars, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and stretch it out as much as possible to try and open that gauge a little bit and give it some drape, because at the moment it's very, very stiff. So as I say, this was knit in Drops Alaska, which is a 100% very rustic wool. So again, I don't think this will be a super comfortable wear, but it's going to be really cute, so I'm going to wear it anyway. The idea behind this was to sort of replicate the Amano star cardigan, which has done the rounds on social media so many times over the years. That was a vintage pattern at the time when I knit this and has now been re-released, but for a hefty price tag. So I wanted to make my own version of this, which is one of the very, very first things I wanted to do when I started knitting, and one of the reasons I started was to be able to see something that wasn't within my budget, but to be able to recreate it. So I have done, and this will be fantastic when it's done, and I'm going to see how this blocks and see what happens. But again, I learned so much about fabric and yarn choice through this project that whatever happens, it will have been worthwhile. The next project was a really special project for me, because this was the first garment I really splurged on the yarn for. I went to the East Anglian Yarn Festival in March last year, and it was my first experience of a fibre arts event, something that I previously didn't know existed, but I went and I had the most fabulous time, and I will be going again this year. So if any of you are in the East Anglian area, let me know, because I will be going to the East Anglian Yarn Festival. It was just the most fabulous event, but there I decided to splurge because I saw, actually I think I took a picture, I saw this sample at the Pigment and Ply stand, and I thought, oh, I need that. That would be the most incredible thing to make myself, and I would be really proud of it. So I splurged and I recreated my own version of that sample. So this was knit in the Pigment and Ply hand-dyed boucle. As you can see, it's lovely. It's got all of these browns and reds and greens and pinks. It's just so beautiful. And then the contrast I used is Drops Daisy. And I picked these really beautiful buttons to go with it. And this was just my first example of creating something really special. This is nothing like you would see in the shops, from the boucle to the contrast colour to the eyelets. It was just really special, and this was the first garment I was wearing out when someone said to me, hey, I love your cardigan, and I said, oh, thank you, I made that, and she couldn't believe it. So that was a really special moment as well, because that was the first time that had happened to me. This pattern is the Velveteen Rose cardigan. I can't quite remember the designer, so I'll put it on the screen. But this was, yeah, the pattern was slightly interesting. I probably wouldn't have chosen it and say it was a really great pattern if I hadn't seen that sample and really wanted to recreate it. But I did really enjoy it. I had to do the button band twice, and I still think it's a little too small. It does pull up a little bit. I'll put in some footage, but it does pull up a little bit at the waist. So I'm of half a mind to redo this. I think the standard bind off that was called for means it just doesn't really have any give. So I would potentially redo this with a stretchy bind off and pick up a few more stitches than the pattern specifies, which I already, as I say, I went back. I did shorten the cardigan from the pattern length, but I did quite a lot of math to work out how many stitches I would need to pick up anyway, and it didn't quite work out, so I had to redo it, and I picked up more stitches and it still pulls in. So I may end up going back into that at some point, but let's be honest, I probably won't. But it is really beautiful, and I've not worn this for a while, and now I really want to because I'm reminded of how gorgeous this is. It was just one of those really special knits in my early knitting journey that I really enjoy looking back on, and enjoy the process of finding that yarn, choosing it and making it. So the next thing I knit was also using a yarn from Pigment and Ply that I picked up at the East Anglian Yarn Festival, and that was a pair of socks. This, I remember, was their King Arthur colourway, and it has all of these reds and greens and browns. It's really beautiful. This was just a vanilla sock with no particular pattern used. This was when I was sort of perfecting my vanilla sock recipe, so I actually ended up knitting 3 socks for this pair, and I still feel like one is slightly bigger than the other, even though I knit with all the same measurements, so who knows what was going on. But when I knit with the Emma's yarn, I found that merino sort of relaxes quite a lot, so I decided to knit these on a 2.25 because I was thinking that 2.5 was just a bit big for me, so I tried 2.25 and they were way too tight. So I think personally that the Emma's yarn just stretches out quite a bit, and now I've knit a few more pairs with that yarn, I would concur that yarn for me it just relaxes and it goes quite baggy. So I knit a whole sock with the 2.25 and they were just too tight, so I had to, after blocking that one, I then had to make a second one in 2.5, tried that on and that was much better, so I undid the first one and redid it. The one thing I would say about this yarn is, whilst I just love Pigment and Ply's hand dyeing, the colours that she comes up with are just so beautiful. I've had a lot of pigment loss on these socks. The first time I washed and blocked it, despite washing it in cool water with a gentle wool wash, and I was so gentle with them, so much of the colour ran, to the point that the sock that I'd blocked and the sock that I hadn't blocked, you could see a really defined difference between. And since then I've lost quite a lot of pigment on the sole of the foot. If you then compare that to if you compare this area to sort of up here, you can see that this is a lot lighter. It's quite hard to show on camera, but they are very sort of washed out on the heels. And I mean, I will say that in my house, hand knit socks get worn. I am not afraid of wearing my hand knit socks, because what's the point in knitting them if you're not going to wear them? So they do get worn. They get worn out with shoes. I mean, not that much because I'm a bit of a homebody, but they do get worn out. So I would expect some wear, and I'm fine with that. However, there has been a lot of pigment loss on these, and they don't look like the same yarn that I picked up and bought that day, which is a little bit of a shame. But I still absolutely love them, and I think the variegation is still beautiful. I'll put a picture in here of when I first knit them, and you might be able to see the sort of difference between now. But I have worn them a lot and I've loved them, so it doesn't really matter to me. And the parts that are the worst are the bit on the bottom of your foot that no one sees anyway. And it's a bit of an ask to go for hand dyed yarn and then to walk on it all day and expect it to still look perfect. So I still love these, but that's one of my learnings, is that if you're using highly variegated hand dyed yarn in dark colours for your hand knit socks, if you wear them a lot, you might notice that you lose some of the pigment, particularly in the sole of the foot. And I say that because on my next pair, they were also a hand-dyed pair of socks. This was also a pair of hand-dyed socks in a vanilla sock recipe picked up from the East Anglian Yarn Festival, and these were for my partner. He came with me to the East Anglian Yarn Festival and he so patiently walked around all day, and he chose himself, ended up choosing himself some yarn, and I said, choose yourself some yarn and I will knit you a pair of socks to thank you for coming with me and putting up with me. And that was this pair, and they are this beautiful sort of self-striping variegated. I think this was a merino nylon yak blend. So it has this almost black halo, which is the yak, and I have another knit later on that I knit in that had a yak blend, and you do get that sort of black halo. It's soft like alpaca, but the halo is black. It's really interesting. But these were knit for him. They're very long man foot, and they have been worn to death. He loves these socks. They've been worn so much. He wears them in his big Doc Marten boots for long retail shifts where he's on his feet all day, and they have lost basically no pigment. They've held up so well. Yeah, he's been wearing these for probably sort of over 6 months. Really hard wearing them, washed a lot, and they've held up so well. So I was really pleased with those. I will find the dyer because I know I kept the label, and I'll put it on the screen here. But yeah, just know that is a hand-dyed yarn that has really stood the test. So the next thing was probably my fanciest yarn I've ever worked with, and this was I believe it was a merino silk yak blend, and it is so soft. This colour, look at this colour. I wish you could feel it through the screen, but you cannot. And this I knitted the Tombo Tee by Florence Miller, and that pattern, oh my goodness, it is the perfect like spring tea pattern. It has this really interesting saddle shoulder construction, but it's like a contiguous saddle shoulder. So you start at the back and then you increase on either side of the saddle shoulders, and eventually you end up with enough that you can bring it around and cast on the front. So you cast on the stitches for the back, and then there's no more picking up or anything around the front and the sides. It just sort of develops. So it's really clever. This took a very long time to knit because it's a fingering weight when I was not that confident a knitter, doing lots of new techniques with sort of like raglan increases along the sleeves. So it was a really clever knit, and it was really enjoyable to work up, but it did take significant amount of time being a fingering weight garment. This was my first and only fingering weight garment, but it was so worth it. It is the perfect little cropped baby tee moment, and it's so soft. It's a joy to wear. It has got a hole in it. So now, to add to my repertoire, I need to learn about mending. I don't know how that happened. It must have been a snag or something, but I washed it recently and then noticed there was a hole in it. So that needs fixing, which is a shame, but that's why we love wool, because we can just keep fixing. But this is an absolute joy. This is definitely one of my favourite projects of the year, and every time I wear this I get compliments on it, and this was the first thing that I knit that I then showed my family, and they're like, oh, wow, that is clever, you made that. And I was like, yes, I am an expert knitter now. Another steep learning curve, there you go, you can see, is I tried helical knitting with this because it is a hand-dyed yarn, and it did not work for me. My tension was clearly incorrect. I think what I did was I tightened the helical stitches that I use, like slip stitches, and then move on to the next one. I tightened them too much, and it created this line. So because whilst it is hand dyed, it's not very highly variegated, and to be honest, I probably would have got away with just joining, but I think what I would do if I were to knit this again, what I would do is I would just alternate skeins neatly at the side and because there's so little variegation, you just wouldn't notice, and it would be a lot less noticeable than this line from the helical knitting that I did try really hard to block out, but it didn't. But we're saying it's handmade, we don't mind, we'll just learn. So again, a lot of learning from this piece. And again, I can't remember the hand dyer off the top of my head. I feel like it was something like Velvet Sixpence, so I'll put that on the screen. The next thing was we're now into the summer knitting territory. And again, my first summer knitting, so I was trying lots of different things, and I knit the Darjeeling top. I'll put the designer on the screen. I really should have prepped for this, but I'm just trying to get through this and get it done quickly before it's not relevant anymore, because I know I'm already a bit late with it. So forgive me for not having all the information to hand. I just wanted to get this done whilst I had a little bit of light, because the weather's been awful. So this was, yes, the Darjeeling top, and this was knit in Drop Saffron, I believe, which is a cotton yarn. So this was my first cotton knit, and it has this absolutely beautiful lace hem. This was a lovely knit, it was beautiful. The only thing I wish is that I wish I'd knit a size down. You can see it's wide, it is too wide for me, and I persist anyway. And I wear it anyway, but it really is too wide for me. And I just wish, because I was in between sizes, and I thought that having more positive ease and it being flowy would be better than it being tight fitting. And I now realise it should have been the other way around, because the cotton is very, very drapey. So I feel like I'm sort of drowning in fabric a little bit, and it never really sits the way I want it to sit, but it's still really beautiful and I still wear it. The one thing I did end up doing was I ended up stitching the button closure, because I was finding I was getting quite a lot of gaping, because the yarn is very, very flowy. And it's got these beautiful buttons, which were vintage ones from my partner's mum's stash that she's been given by various relatives and friends over the years. So she has all sorts of odds and ends, and yeah, she gave me these beautiful like little sunflower buttons, and this really does feel like a sunflowery summery top. So I do really love it, and I will absolutely be knitting more patterns from this designer, because her repertoire just has the most, there is just some really, really beautiful patterns in there. And this is lace knitting that I can enjoy. It was a bit of a process, because there's a picot edge, and then there's a lot of lace to get this sort of scallop shaped, but it's so beautiful. And one of those patterns that, again, you can't really believe is a hand knit when you see all of that. But it probably, then the rest of it, and the fact that it doesn't fit very well, probably makes it look like my most handmade piece. But I still really, really love it. And I think I just need to work out some ways to style it, maybe like over different tops or dresses, to make the size work for me. So now we're coming back to an accessory, and that is my armour socks by the New York Year. I've talked about these in recent podcasts, so I won't talk about them too much, because I did finish these fairly recently, and I posted some pictures on my Instagram, which I'll put in here so you can really see the details, but they're really, really beautiful. They've got this moss stitch and this beautiful, beautiful cable design, and then a ribbed back. These were knit in the Earth Harvest Fingering hand natural dyed cinnamon colour, and they are beautiful. They're such a beautiful sock, beautiful colour, beautiful yarn. I have been asked how sock yarns with no nylon hold up, and the answer is I don't know, because this is my first pair. So again, learning curve. And I will update you guys when I've worn these a few more times. I have worn them once now, and you can see I have, or I don't know if you can see because the lighting sort of washes it out a bit, but I have a little colour loss on the sort of points of high stress. But I think I would expect that from a natural dyed yarn, especially a natural dyed yarn that I've used for socks that doesn't have any nylon in. So yeah, I will let you know how these hold up, but they are a beautiful, beautiful sock. I really, really enjoyed working on these. The pattern was just stunning. I love the New York Years patterns. They're just so creative but so well written, so interesting. I feel like she packs so much detail into a little piece of fabric, and I just love that. I really enjoyed working on these. So they're one that I'll come back to later to update you on how they wear, how they hold up, but I really enjoyed this pair of socks. And I'm not going to say any more, because if you want to, you can check out my previous podcasts when I was working on these and chatting about them. So now we have my last garment of the year that I finished, and that is the Felix pullover by Amy Christophers. And I knit this because I just wanted a bit of almost instant gratification. I wanted a really quick knit, because I felt like with all the summer knits, as I'll talk about in my unfinished projects, it was in that sort of period in the middle of the year where I cast loads of things on and didn't finish them, because I was just really learning so much about fibre and design and trying lots of different things, that actually committing to a project and finishing a project wasn't going so well. So I wanted to commit to something that would be a bit of an easy win. And so I picked this up and I knit this with Drops brushed alpaca, and I held it double to make this really light, flowy, soft autumnal jumper. I wanted the perfect autumn jumper that felt cozy, super soft in an autumnal colour, but wasn't too hot, because it was getting to the point where I wanted to wear jumpers and I wanted to wear knitwear, but my cloud sweater, my sweater number 18 were just too hot, too warm to wear in the early autumn months. So I knit this up and it was just a breeze. It knit up so quickly. I think it was on 6mm. It has the beautiful eyelet detail. Again, I'll put some pictures in of me wearing this because I took some nice ones. But this was a lovely, fun, quick knit. And it was my first experience of doing a full raglan sweater. I did raglan on the Tombo Tee, but obviously that wasn't a full length long sleeve sweater. So it was really nice to, and that had the contiguous saddle shoulder construction, so it wasn't a raglan all the way through. So I wanted to try a full raglan, and this was really enjoyable. The only thing I would say is that it has a very wide neckline, which isn't super to my taste, but that is, I think, how it was intended in the pattern anyway, so that's not through any fault of mine or the designers. It's just something that perhaps if I were knitting a different raglan, or when I've got a little bit more experience to be able to sort of modify patterns a bit better, that I may change if I were to knit this again. But it was a lovely knit, a lot of fun, and it's so soft and cozy. I would really recommend trying something like the Drops brushed alpaca. Is it brushed alpaca silk? I think it's brushed alpaca silk. Held double to get a thicker gauge, but a really light and soft jumper. Again, I talked about this a lot in the podcast when I was working on this, so if you want to hear more about it, then please check out my podcast. And that brings us on to the last project that I finished, which was a gift knit for Christmas. So I don't actually have it with me, but I'll put some footage in here. I spoke about this at length in my last podcast very recently, so I won't talk about this too much. But this was my first experience working with cashmere for these mittens for my mum for Christmas. And I really enjoyed working with cashmere. It was a dream to be working with something so soft and luxurious on my hands. And I really enjoyed this Cloudburst pattern by Arian Gray. It was a lovely simple free pattern, and it just worked up beautifully. This lace motif was gorgeous. It was just enough lace to have a lovely pattern, but not enough that I hated knitting it, because like me and lace are just not super buddies. I'd rather knit cables any day, but I also did not want to knit cables on a black fingering weight yarn, so we went for lace, and they just worked up so beautifully. The finished product feels so luxurious, and my mum is really pleased with them, so that was a real win, and a real sort of luxury highlight to end the year on. So thank you for joining me. and listening to me talk about all of the things I knit in 2024. As I say, there will be another video where I talk about everything I didn't finish in 2024, which I think will be a very interesting one. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below of what your favourite knit was of 2024. I'd love to hear about your favourite patterns, yarns, designs of the year, so I can check them out and maybe add them into my 2025 rotation. So please let me know, and thank you for joining and getting cozy with me, and I'll see you soon.